Detective Alex Carter arrived at the opulent penthouse of Margaret Evans on a crisp autumn evening in Chicago. The city's skyline glittered beyond the glass walls, a stark contrast to the grim scene within. Margaret, a striking woman in her late 40s, stood amidst the chaos, her designer dress splattered with the blood of her husband, Charles. Her face was a mask of shock and disarray, eyes wide and hollow as she clutched a bloodied knife. Margaret Evans, once a socialite known for her impeccable taste and charitable work, had been a fixture of high society since her marriage to Charles. Born and raised in a wealthy family in New York, Margaret was the daughter of a prominent banker. She met Charles at a charity gala in her early 20s. He was a successful businessman, known for his ruthless efficiency. At 48, Margaret was a well-preserved woman, her blonde hair and striking blue eyes giving her a classic beauty that had only matured with age. Charles Evans, aged 52, was a towering figure in the world of finance. Originally from a modest background in Cleveland, he had clawed his way up the corporate ladder to become a highly respected, if feared, CEO of a major investment firm. His success had afforded him a life of luxury and power, but his aggressive nature often translated into a domineering presence at home. The pressure of his career and a pattern of abusive behavior had strained his marriage with Margaret, creating a volatile home environment. The penthouse, a sprawling testament to Charles's success, was now a crime scene. Expensive artwork, designer furniture, and lush rugs lay in disarray, interrupted by the stark, unsettling presence of blood. The scene painted a picture of chaos that did not fit Margaret's polished persona. As Alex surveyed the room, he could see the carefully curated life that had been shattered within moments. Margaret's demeanor was disoriented, her hands trembling as she recounted the events to Alex. "He came at me," she said, her voice wavering. "He was enraged, and I had to defend myself. I didn't mean to." Her words trailed off into sobs. Alex, a seasoned detective in his late 40s, had seen his share of high-profile cases, but this one felt different. He had spent 20 years on the force, his graying hair and weary eyes betraying the weight of countless investigations. Known for his methodical approach and unerring intuition, Alex had earned a reputation for solving the most perplexing cases. Tonight, his instincts were already signaling that something was amiss. The initial investigation seemed straightforward. Margaret's account of self-defense was supported by her initial testimony and the evidence at hand. However, the disarray of the scene and Margaret's pristine appearance raised Alex's suspicions. How had someone so poised and composed end up in such a violent confrontation? The forensic evidence would need to tell a fuller story. As Alex delved deeper into the Evans' lives, he found a seemingly perfect world veiling underlying discord. Margaret's socialite status and Charles' formidable career had allowed them to cultivate an image of perfection, but beneath the surface lay a marriage riddled with unhappiness. The couple had been married for 25 years, a union that once held promise but had gradually devolved into resentment and discord. Friends and associates described Charles as a demanding and often cruel husband, while Margaret had struggled to maintain her poise amidst her husband's abuse and increasing financial strains. A breakthrough in the case came when Alex interviewed Margaret's personal assistant, Jennifer Carter, a young woman in her late 20s. Jennifer revealed that Margaret had been under significant stress lately, juggling Charles' erratic behavior with her own personal issues. She mentioned that Margaret had seemed increasingly distant and worried, a fact that hinted at deeper trouble. The catalyst for the unraveling of their lives came in the form of Tom Miller, a charming and ambitious actor in his early 30s who had recently entered their orbit. Tom was an aspiring star with a reputation for being charismatic yet unreliable. He had been seeing Margaret romantically for a few months, a relationship that had begun as a flirtation but quickly evolved into a full-blown affair. His arrival in their lives was like a spark igniting a powder keg. Tom's involvement with Margaret had been hidden from Charles, but his presence in the penthouse on the night of the murder was undeniable. Alex discovered that Tom had been staying in the city for an audition and had been seen leaving the penthouse shortly before the murder occurred. His alibi for the night was shaky at best, and his role in the unfolding drama became increasingly significant. As Alex pieced together the events leading up to the murder, he uncovered troubling details. Charles had discovered the affair and confronted Margaret in a fit of rage. The argument had escalated into violence, and Margaret, armed with a knife for protection, had fought back. The physical evidence suggested a struggle, but Margaret's account seemed overly convenient, raising doubts about her version of the story. The image of Margaret's bloodied dress and the pristine surroundings of the penthouse began to coalesce into a narrative of deception. Alex's intuition told him that the surface details were only part of the story. Behind the veneer of opulence and success lay a tale of betrayal, manipulation, and hidden motives. The perfect life that Margaret and Charles had meticulously crafted was crumbling, revealing the raw, messy reality underneath. As the investigation progressed, Alex knew that the key to unraveling the case lay in understanding the true dynamics of the Evans relationship and the role that Tom had played in the fatal night. The luxurious setting of their lives had masked a darker truth, one that was now emerging from the shadows. The facade of a perfect marriage was falling apart, and Alex was determined to uncover the truth hidden beneath the surface of this shattered illusion. Detective Alex Carter had begun to suspect that Margaret Evans's story was more than just a tale of self-defense. The more he investigated, the clearer it became that the Evans' seemingly perfect life was underpinned by a complex web of lies and betrayal. The facade of luxury and success hid a maelstrom of jealousy, paranoia, and hidden relationships. As Alex delved deeper into the lives of Margaret and Charles, he discovered that their marriage had long been a battlefield. Charles's demanding nature and abusive tendencies had created an environment of constant tension. Margaret, while outwardly maintaining her image of grace and sophistication, was secretly struggling with feelings of entrapment and resentment. The first major breakthrough came from reviewing Margaret's phone records and emails. Among the routine correspondence, Alex found a series of messages exchanged between Margaret and Tom Miller that painted a clearer picture of their relationship. Their messages were filled with passionate declarations and coded references to their plans to escape Charles' control. They discussed future dreams and the imminent need to break free from the oppressive grip of Margaret's husband. In one particular email, Margaret wrote, "Charles is getting suspicious. We need to be careful. If he finds out, everything will be ruined." The urgency in her tone suggested that the affair was far from casual. It was a desperate attempt to reclaim a semblance of control and freedom. Tom's replies were filled with reassurances and promises of a new life together, but they also revealed his growing anxiety about the situation. Alex decided to confront Tom, who had been living in a modest apartment downtown while awaiting auditions. Tom's charm was palpable, but there was an underlying anxiety in his demeanor that Alex found telling. When asked about his whereabouts on the night of the murder, Tom's responses were evasive, and he seemed unnervously fidgety. During their conversation, Tom claimed he had been out meeting friends at a bar, but Alex's instincts told him that Tom was hiding something. His alibi didn't match up with the time frame of the murder, and his discomfort when discussing Margaret's relationship with Charles was noticeable. Alex left Tom with a warning, subtly suggesting that withholding information could have serious consequences. The tension between Margaret and Tom began to escalate. Tom grew increasingly agitated, his fear of being implicated in the murder driving him to take irrational actions. One evening, while Margaret was out attending a charity gala, Tom took the opportunity to visit her penthouse unannounced. He was desperate to discuss their plans and his growing concerns about their situation. Margaret, already stressed from the ongoing investigation and her strained relationship with Charles, was barely able to maintain her composure. Their meeting was heated. Tom accused Margaret of not being forthcoming about her plans and not doing enough to ensure his safety. Margaret, in turn, lashed out at him, her frustration with her deteriorating situation bubbling to the surface. "You don't understand what I'm going through," she shouted. "Charles is dead, and I'm the one who's left to deal with the fallout. This is more complicated than you think." Their argument was interrupted when Alex's partner, Detective Laura Mitchell, arrived at the penthouse for a routine check. Tom quickly hid behind a curtain, barely avoiding detection. Laura's presence added to the mounting stress, and the close call only fueled Tom's paranoia. He was convinced that Alex was closing in on him and that Margaret's attempts to maintain control were failing. Meanwhile, Margaret's behavior became increasingly erratic. The pressure of the investigation, combined with her growing fear of losing everything she had built, pushed her to the brink. She began to act irrationally, avoiding her social circle and withdrawing from public appearances. Her once immaculate appearance became disheveled, and her demeanor, once composed, was now tinged with paranoia. The situation took a darker turn when Alex discovered a hidden safe in the penthouse's study. Inside, he found a collection of documents and photographs that seemed to indicate a much deeper involvement between Margaret and Tom. Among the papers were notes detailing meetings, planned escapes, and even a list of potential alibis. The evidence pointed to a premeditated plan, contradicting Margaret's initial claim of a spontaneous act of self-defense. Alex's next move was to scrutinize the security footage from the penthouse building's lobby and elevator. To his surprise, he found footage of Margaret and Tom entering and exiting the building at odd hours. The footage showed them together, looking tense and hurried. There was a clear pattern of secretive meetings, further reinforcing Alex's suspicions. The tension between Margaret and Tom reached a boiling point when Tom, feeling increasingly cornered, decided to confront Margaret one last time. He arrived at the penthouse late one night, determined to resolve their situation before it spiraled further out of control. Margaret, already fraught with anxiety, was not prepared for Tom's sudden outburst. In their heated confrontation, Tom demanded that Margaret make a decision about their future. "I can't keep living like this," he pleaded. "We need to either go through with our plan or get out of this mess. I can't be stuck in limbo any longer." Margaret, overwhelmed and desperate, tried to calm him down, but her attempts were in vain. The confrontation grew increasingly volatile, and Tom's frustration led him to make a threatening move. He accused Margaret of being deceitful and not fully committed to their escape plan. His threats became more aggressive, and Margaret, in a moment of panic, attempted to placate him with promises and apologies. Their argument was abruptly interrupted when a neighbor, disturbed by the noise, called the police. Alex and Laura arrived at the scene just in time to witness Tom storming out of the penthouse, visibly agitated. Margaret, now frantic and on edge, struggled to explain the situation. She claimed it was a misunderstanding, but Alex was unconvinced. The close call with the police only deepened the distrust between Margaret and Tom. The increasing scrutiny from the investigation and their own mounting fears led to a dangerous spiral of irrational behavior. Margaret's desperate attempts to maintain control of the narrative and Tom's growing paranoia set the stage for further conflict. As Alex continued to unravel the layers of deceit, he realized that the case was far from straightforward. The seemingly perfect lives of Margaret and Charles Evans were built on a foundation of lies, and the true story of what happened that fateful night was becoming increasingly elusive. The web of deceit had entangled everyone involved, and Alex was determined to untangle it, no matter where the investigation led. The tension between Margaret Evans and Tom Miller had reached a breaking point. The stress of the investigation, the deteriorating relationship, and the looming threat of discovery had pushed them both to the edge. As Alex Carter continued to piece together the events leading up to Charles Evans' death, he sensed that the case was about to take a dramatic turn. The night of the confrontation was the most volatile yet. Margaret had been struggling to maintain a facade of normalcy. She had withdrawn from her social obligations, becoming increasingly paranoid and isolated. Her attempts to hold her life together were unraveling, and she was on the verge of a complete breakdown. Tom, meanwhile, was increasingly desperate, feeling the noose of suspicion tightening around him. Their clandestine meetings had become more frantic, and their plans for escape seemed increasingly futile. One fateful evening, Tom showed up at the penthouse, determined to force a resolution to their predicament. The argument that ensued was heated, filled with accusations, threats, and raw emotion. Tom's anger had reached a boiling point. He felt betrayed by Margaret's reluctance to commit fully to their escape plan and his growing sense of entrapment. Margaret, already on edge, tried to defuse the situation. She pleaded with Tom to calm down, but her words only seemed to stoke the flames of his rage. The argument grew increasingly violent. Tom, his face flushed with anger, grabbed a vase from a nearby table and hurled it against the wall. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the penthouse, heightening the tension. In the midst of their confrontation, Tom accused Margaret of deliberately sabotaging their plans to save herself, all while dragging him deeper into a situation he could not escape. His voice was filled with desperation and accusation. Margaret, feeling cornered and frightened, tried to defend herself, but was overwhelmed by Tom's fury. Her attempts to reason with him only seemed to make him more aggressive. In a moment of blind panic, Margaret reached for the knife she had used on the night of Charles' murder, keeping it hidden for her own protection. She didn't intend to use it on Tom, but in the chaos of the confrontation, her fear and adrenaline took over. As Tom lunged towards her, Margaret swung the knife in self-defense. The knife caught Tom in the side, and he staggered backward, his face contorted in shock and pain. The sight of Tom's blood spreading across the floor sent Margaret into a state of utter panic. She rushed to Tom's side, trying to stop the bleeding, but it was too late. Tom's breathing became labored, and his eyes glazed over as he slowly succumbed to his injuries. Margaret, overwhelmed by the gravity of what had just happened, was paralyzed by shock. The noise of the struggle had drawn the attention of neighbors, and within minutes the police arrived. Alex and Laura, responding to another disturbance call, found themselves at the scene of a new crime. As they entered the penthouse, the sight of Tom's lifeless body and Margaret's distraught figure told a story of chaos and desperation. Margaret, in a state of disarray, tried to explain the situation, but her story was fraught with inconsistencies. Her initial claim that Tom had attacked her was undermined by the physical evidence and her frantic demeanor. Alex noted the blood-stained knife and the chaotic state of the penthouse, and his suspicion deepened. Margaret's explanations did not align with the forensic evidence, and her actions were beginning to paint a picture of a premeditated crime. The subsequent investigation revealed the full extent of Margaret's deception. Alex discovered that Margaret had planned Tom's murder as a way to eliminate a loose end and solidify her control over the narrative of her husband's death. Her initial story of self-defense fell apart under scrutiny, revealing a deeper, more sinister motive. Margaret's arrest was a media sensation. The courtroom drama that followed was intense and highly publicized. The prosecution argued that Margaret had killed Tom in a fit of rage and desperation, using the confrontation as a cover for her premeditated intentions. The defense, led by Margaret's attorney, attempted to portray her as a victim of circumstance, driven to act out of self-preservation in the face of mounting threats. The trial was a spectacle. Margaret's carefully constructed image of a grieving widow and wronged lover was dismantled piece by piece. Evidence presented in court showed the premeditated nature of her actions. The emails and documents Alex had uncovered proved that Margaret had planned Tom's murder to clear her path and avoid suspicion. The prosecution painted a picture of a woman who had manipulated and betrayed those closest to her to secure her own freedom. The climax of the trial came when Tom's final moments were detailed in court. His desperate phone call to a friend, moments before his death, was played for the jury. The call revealed Tom's growing fear and realization that he had been used and betrayed by Margaret. His last words were a chilling testament to the severity of his situation. In a dramatic and emotional verdict, the jury found Margaret guilty of murder. The evidence of premeditation and the brutal nature of the crime left little room for doubt. Margaret was sentenced to life in prison, her once perfect life now a shattered remnant of her former self. The aftermath of the trial left a deep impact on everyone involved. Alex, while satisfied with the outcome, was left to grapple with the moral complexities of the case. He had uncovered a dark truth behind the facade of wealth and success, but the emotional toll of the investigation lingered. The Evans story had been one of betrayal, desperation, and ultimately, a tragic end to their carefully curated lives. As Margaret was led away to begin her sentence, her demeanor was a mixture of defiance and despair. The life she had fought so hard to preserve was now irrevocably lost, and the web of deceit she had woven had ultimately ensnared her in its own trap. The finality of her situation left her with nothing but the cold reality of her actions. In the end, the case of Margaret Evans and Tom Miller was a stark reminder of how the pursuit of self-preservation and the desire to maintain control could lead to devastating consequences. The search for truth had revealed the darkest aspects of human nature, and the resolution of the case brought a somber closure to a story of shattered illusions and broken lies.